Hello, and welcome to Pivotal Moments, a podcast where we share, explore, and celebrate stories of change, big or small. We are all agents of change and have the power to pivot at any point, at any time. I'm your host, Siria Gutierrez, along with my co-host, Melissa Robena. On this episode, we will discuss the types of pivots people make, focusing on the natural reasons.
Natural reasons. So what do we mean by that? For me, it means how we evolve as people, right? And so I came across this really great quote that I think would help kickstart off this session, and it's by Daniel Gilbert. He's an author of Stumbling on Happiness. And in it, he writes, "Human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think that they're finished. The person you are right now is as transient, as fleeting, and as temporary as all the people you've ever been. The one constant in our lives is change."
That's absolutely true.
It really is.
You are not your past self, and you're not your future self either. You just are.
You're just there, right? So when I was doing the research for this episode, I think there's a lot of talk about change and evolving or evolution, and I think people might mistakenly think that they're synonymous. But is it really? And it kind of leads me to think that evolving does require change at some level, whether it's mentally, physically, whatever. But just because you change doesn't necessarily mean that you evolve, right? Kind of reminds me of in math, we would say that every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square. Think about that. But I mean, I think it's being mindful and looking at the changes that we're making. And like you mentioned, like who we are yesterday or even 5 years ago isn't who we are today.
Right. But it's really interesting because even though we are not those people, and we may know that logically, emotionally, we are still stuck at wherever we didn't get a chance to grow and, like you said, evolve. We may have changed, but we didn't evolve. And if you didn't take that additional step where you got stuck or something made you get stuck there, that's something that you can still carry on. And so you may still be living a life of, your 16-year-old version of yourself that really wanted you to be, a doctor. And you're sticking to that because that's what you'd made that decision back when you were 16. And maybe that doesn't serve you anymore, but for whatever reason, you still have that emotional 16-year-old in charge of that decision of your life.
No, that's a really good point. And it actually, when you're talking about what didn't serve you, it served you then, right? At 16, you're like, okay, I want to be a doctor, but it doesn't serve you now. Well, what transpired between then and now? And that leads me to the theory of social constructionism.
Okay, I want to know about this because you mentioned it, and when we do our research, we go down completely different paths.
Oh, yeah.
So I really want to know what your path is, because say that one more time.
It's social constructionism.
Okay.
It's a sociology theory, and it was first introduced in the book. It was a 1966 book by sociologists Peter L. Berger and Thomas Luckman, and it was titled The Social Construction of Reality. And basically, it means that all meaning is socially created. So our reality, our values, and our beliefs are constructed through our daily conversations and interactions with the world around us. So if you think about it, like since we've been born, think of all the interactions that we've had with people, experiences, books, films, and cultures that have continuously shaped our perception, memory, knowledge, and cognition of the world around us.
So this theory of social construction, does that then lead you to like, how does that work into the narrative of a natural transition that someone's going to make? Are you emulating things that you've seen, or is it something that has an influence and we don't even know?
It's some of it can be cognitive, and but a lot of it is subconscious, right? So every interaction, even our conversation, our interview with Megan last week, that dialogue, that interaction with Megan has changed my worldview or perception of the trans community and even individuals within the medical community. Had I not had that interaction with Megan, I would still be operating from an old reality. So every interaction, and I think it comes back to just not even being aware. I think we talked about in one episode that we make choices automatically without even thinking of it. Much like our reality is, we say things and do things without really thinking about it. But those realities, those ideas that are formed in our brain that eventually comes out through dialogue or whatever, it's been constructed all throughout your life. So where you are today, how you think today is a result of interactions from your past, which I find to be so fascinating.
It really is. And just to follow up on what you're saying, after we had our interview with Megan, I had another conversation, a long conversation with one of my best friends that I haven't had a chance to talk to in a while. And we started the conversation talking about trans and trans communities, and she felt very attacked by the school system because the school system was asking her 12-year-old to identify their pronouns, and she was like, she's too young, it's too soon. And we had this discussion, but I now had a whole nother appreciation and level of awareness and empathy for the trans community. And so we didn't get into a fight. We're still really good friends, but we were able to have a conversation, a hard conversation about the trans community, her being upset about the school district doing certain things. And really when we unwrapped what was going on, she was just really upset at feeling like everybody is telling her how to raise her kids. And so I think that that's a recurring theme that a lot of parents have, of just knowing that, hey, but there's so many outside influences that are going to take part of, that are going to impact that shaping of the person.
And that goes for everybody. But when you think about every interaction that you have with someone could potentially shape or change the reality, I think that shows that we have like greater importance on, or should show or demonstrate greater importance in our conversations. Are we continuously, sharing truth, or are we spreading lies? And, whether those lies are real or perceived, what we tell ourselves, right? And for me, it's when you think about social constructionism, how can you not evolve? We're evolving at every moment of our life with everything that we say and do. Everything that you watch on TV, everything you're reading on Facebook, that is at some level changing your reality. You might, come across a new article that might change your views on voting, or whatever. And so social constructionism is occurring at every point in your life. And I think that that's what, when we talk about evolving, for me, that's social construction at work. And that's because we're constantly evolving. And I found the theory to be very fascinating.
And it is, because it is something that you can also understand. Yeah, of course, the world around us is going to impact us and is going to lead to some very natural changes. And actually, I think your theory leads really well into the actual pivotal theory that I found by psychoanalyst Erik Erikson. And so Dr. Erik Erikson, he is basically the godfather of the life cycle. And so he wrote the book on, it's called The Life Cycle Completed. Like, he literally wrote the book and broke down the different natural phases that every human being is going to go through. Okay. And so he identifies 8 stages of life, 8 cycles of life. Shakespeare identified 7 in one of his plays, As You Like It, I believe. I'll have to confirm that one. But yeah, so talking about how we all just evolve naturally. So that's kind of where I went with everything. And so when Erickson's talking about this stuff, the first phase of life is infancy. And so that's going to be roughly, and keep in mind, any age groups that I throw out right now are ranges. You could really get stuck in one age, or you can get catapulted into the next phase. But this is just of human evolution, how things are going to happen. So first phase is going to be infancy, birth to 18 months. Early childhood is going to be your 18 months to 3 years old. Your play age, playing is a really important stage from 3 to about 5. Your school age is the next phase, and that is from 6 to 12. Then you enter adolescence, young adulthood, maturity, which is where we might be, I'm not sure, old age, and in the last update of his book, there was an additional chapter that was added that talks about a possible 9th stage, which is basically when you're like 80 years old and up. But what's fascinating about it is that in each of these stages, you have to learn a particular skill, or you have to learn a particular truth almost that you need in order to build and be able to move on. So like for instance, in infancy, what you're learning there is trust and mistrust. So your attachment issues that may come up for people, you learn them in infancy. And it's like, wait, you're not even conscious of what happened back then, right? So the core issue there is you're trying to show the person hope, and hope that somebody is going to do the right thing. So once you've established that foundation of there are people around me who can trust, then you build into the person. Yes, you can hope because you know that there are loving people around you who are going to catch you if you fall. And so each one of these phases, he goes through and identifies everything that you need in these different phases. And so as I was going through this, I got really emotional because I realized that for the school age, that's where you're learning industry. That's where you're learning to be competent, and you're learning all new things, and just knowing, you're getting input from other people because this is the first time you're going to be really outside of your core family, and you're going to have other authority figures for the first time in your life, right? Who are going to have an impact on you. That phase, when I was thinking about it, was like, that's where you learn that you're not enough.
Wow.
And it was like, I'm really sad. And I went over and I was like, Matt, I need a hug. He's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? I was like, I just learned in doing the research, like where it is that you have those messages. And
that's the message that came to you, is that you're not enough?
Yeah. The you're not enough phase. Like I learned it in that stage because at that age. And so when I did a little bit more research on it, that competency phase from 6 to 12 years old, especially if you have a high ACE score, which is, I'm going to have to remember that one. It's adverse childhood experiences. So everybody has some of those. A score of 4 or more means that you are traumatized, that you had a really traumatic childhood of some kind. Everybody's going to have at least a 1 on there. There's going to be something that happened. I score on the higher end. I don't remember my score right now, but looking at these are the changes that you're going to be making, and you have to go through the space. You have to learn that, yeah, you can do this, but the fact that maybe your little art project wasn't as good as Bobby's. Okay. That doesn't mean that you suck.
No, of course not.
Right. But if the kids aren't getting the right messaging from the people around them, everybody who's going to be in their sphere of influence, right, they can either be reinforcing these negative thoughts, or they can be helping them. Yeah. It's okay that yours isn't as good because you did the best that you could. You put in a lot of effort on here, and you should be proud of what you accomplished, not necessarily the result. And so when I was thinking about these natural changes that we make, I'm just thinking, wow, this is amazing that in these natural changes that we are all going to evolve through in our complete life, you still have to learn certain lessons. And the great part about therapy and mental health is that you can actually go back and you can work on these issues to help you emotionally get out of these phases, because there might be parts of your life that are still lingering in the past.
So in our first segment, you talked a little bit about identity. I believe it was one of the phases, right? And what I found to be interesting is in my research, I found that social constructionism actually influences our construction of our own identity. And so according to the psychological identity theory, there are actually 4 stages. So the first stage is no identity. So this is when we are children. I think you had mentioned it earlier, which is we blindly accept whatever is being told to us. And that includes value systems, ideology. And then as we start to get older and enter school, we start to expand our social circle through classmates, if you're on a sporting team, teammates. And so you passively go with what society says blindly. And I know we'll argue on this, but typically at that age, we want to be liked and accepted. So we are typically followers. I know personally speaking, I was not a leader at that age like I am now. But, so then we go into stage 3, which is where you start to experience an identity crisis or an existential crisis. And I think my counselor is actually telling me that a lot of people in their mid-30s or even younger are starting to experience this existential crisis, trying to find out their true identity, and are really starting to see, the values that I hold, are they mine or are they someone else's? And really starting to try to find who they are as a person. And so, and this leads you to explore new lifestyles, belief systems, choices, friends. And then once we leave that stage, which I don't know if I have yet, but once you leave that stage, you then enter stage 4, which is you've come to an acceptance of who you are foundationally. And even though you're not done growing or exploring, you have a better sense of who you are and what your direction in life is.
That makes a lot of sense. I don't know where I'm at on those ones, because last week I can tell you every single day I was wearing a different shade of lipstick, not traditional colors. Like I did like a bright pink, a bright red. I did one that's called Mermaid's Blood. And
is that the blue one?
It was like a bluish green. Yeah. I had so much fun. And so I felt like a teenager. And, that's actually one of the life cycles, is that adolescence piece. And so that's actually talking about where the person actually changes to really start exploring identity. So there's identity in that part versus identity confusion. And so at that point, that's where you're looking for the people who think like you. You're looking for your tribe, if you will. Actually, that is a wrong term. In fact, you can't use that term because it can be derogatory. You're looking for your people is a better way of saying that. Anyways, so you're looking for that identity. And that's one of those things where I'm not at all surprised that people are going back in their 30s, 40s, having this existential crisis, because they weren't given the space to figure out who they really were back during that age period, right? Like we have this prolonged adolescence that people keep talking about, and people staying at home longer, not being able to get jobs sooner, all of those different things. And if you don't have that space to work on your identity and figure those things out, we have to go back. You have to go back and work on those things at some point, because maybe you are so entrenched in your identity that you had when you were 15, 16 years old that you haven't gone on to the next phase. You haven't gone on to the young adult phase, which is, essentially young adult love is about intimacy and love. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not going through that, it's either seeking out intimacy or risking isolation, and like people will diverge on those two paths. And so you need to be able to find those things and really work on those changes. So identity is huge, right? I mean, we talk about identity in everything. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many movies are there on, people's coming of age stories? We love those stories.
We do.
We love teenagers.
Do we?
We love reminiscing about being young and being in those days. And we idolize that, right? So how much of that is, I'm watching Grease, listening to Grease nonstop, annoying my neighbors to no end with me just playing that over and over and over. And who was playing the teenagers? A bunch of old people, including people with the receding hairline. Like John Travolta was not a teenager in that movie. Mm-hmm. Yet here they are showing us, right? Showing us as a social contrast. Oh, here's what a teenager does. A teenager is going to be boy crazy, girl crazy, whatever it is. They're going to be exploring their life, maybe their sexuality. They're going to be experimenting, and they're finally going to be doing things outside of the view of their parents. And those are things that we, as a society, like, I don't know why, but we just gravitate towards those. I think we probably have way more people dealing with identity issues than care to admit it.
Identity crisis and existential crisis. I mean, look at the podcast. You know, am I being called, or am I doing what I'm being called to do? Am I living out my purpose in life? And I think that those are questions that a lot of people ask themselves, and they want the immediate answer now. I know that I did when I first started my journey, and my, you know, counselor is just like, you know, you're evolving as a person, and what you want now, it may not be what you want a year from now. And I think that that's okay. And, you know, if we don't reach a goal, I think sometimes we often beat ourselves up, but it could just be that our priorities change. And I think that that's okay too. And acknowledging that change is good. I mean, if we look back at some of the choices that we made in our teenage years, they're kind of questionable, right?
Well, it's funny that you should mention that, because in front of me, dear listener, I have my on and off again diary from 1995 through 1999. And it's
very well loved. Let's put it that way.
It is well loved. It may have gone through some water damage recently.
The lock is broken.
The lock is broken and rusting. There are cherub angels all over the cover of this 5-year diary. The inside is covered in my abstract artwork from the time. But more fascinating are...
Oh, please read some of it.
Are the items. For instance, August 13th. I'm going to not mention my friends' names. I'm going to just say, well, I'll let you hear it. Blank talked with the spirits on her Ouija board. Too cool. Blank is coming over this week. Cool. Elvis is the greatest. And I love Elvis Presley. He was fine.
You could definitely tell no one uses fine anymore, so that is definitely a 90s term.
A 90s term, and I was also 12 years old. So let's go through that. August 15th. Just to add to the drama. How many times can a heart be broken in one day? At least twice. And I know you want to know the rest of it, but I'm not going to tell you the rest of it.
It's good to know that some things haven't changed, that you're still the drama queen that I know and love today. So, you know.
It all happened somewhere. But, you know, before we started recording, I went through not even a full week's worth of entries with Melissa.
There was one entry she read, and there was a mention of at least 4 boys in there. So
this is true.
4.
This is true. Yeah. But then when we looked at a couple of days before and after, there were other names mentioned during that time period.
Gracious.
There were definitely a lot of different things going on, and I don't know. I mean, was I already in the young adult phase?
Sounds like it.
It sounds like maybe I didn't quite do as much in the adolescence phase, maybe as I would have liked to.
But what I like about the different phases that we've kind of shared on this episode is that you can fluctuate, just as we are as people, right? We're constantly fluctuating. And I think you may be in phase 4, and then something happens and it reverts you back to phase 2. Maybe something triggered you and you need to go back and, you know, revisit a certain thing. I know that I've done that for multiple things in my life, right? But as long as you can go back to that stage, accomplish or achieve whatever it is that you need to in that in order to continue to move forward, I think that is what's really important here. Would you agree?
I do agree with that. And I would go one step further and still say every version of yourself, this boy crazy version of myself, is still there.
Oh, absolutely.
And is still part of my overall identity and has brought me to where I am today. So there's those different versions of yourself, not necessarily that they're bad. And, you know, you get to a point where you are, I don't want to say allowed, but you get to a point where you give yourself the opportunity to look back and decide, well, does that serve me anymore? One of my favorite versions of myself is my fangirl self. I love being a fangirl. It's a huge part of my identity. I also know it stems to me being a really young person at some point. So I mean, probably back to New Kids on the Block, if we're being honest. But really just having those opportunities to recognize and appreciate every single version is valid, and every single version is something to celebrate, and decide, what version serves me, what doesn't serve me anymore.
And part of my research with social constructionism is that your natural personality, so like if you're an introvert or an extrovert, that may not significantly change, but your worldview or your reality about your life keeps changing to shape you into what you think you should become. So it's not the same as your younger self. So when you're talking about like the boy craziness, Siria is still there. I mean, I know that, and listeners, trust me, it's there. But that doesn't mean that you still haven't evolved as a person. I think
for those worried about Matt, he knows that too. He's good.
But I mean, who you are at the core of yourself does not change. Your experiences and the interactions you have with people shape your worldview and how you interact with the world around you. I think that is what's most important. And if you're looking to kickstart your evolution, that requires that you go out and experience new things. So maybe surround yourself with people whom you like, maybe achievers. Start to read new books, watch new films, take time to reflect or create something new. And in those ways, you'll just through the theory of social constructionism, you'll continue to evolve. Dear listeners, we want to hear from you. What stuck out to you in this episode? What phase of life or identity stage are you in? Find us on facebook.com/Pivotal Moments HQ. Join us next time when we will discuss the life-changing event pivot. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR production. Thank you for listening. Remember, it's never too late, and you're right on time.